Welcome to another episode of the Hoopsfix Podcast with me, your host Sam Neater, full-time British basketball advocate. This one has been a long time in the making, 10, 11 months or so, ever since Jamie Edwards, who is today's guest, became the new owner of the Manchester Giants BBL franchise. I really wanted to get him on to kind of discuss the goals, aspirations of the team, what he's trying to do with the club, and why he decided to get involved. Interestingly enough, he is a former England senior international, former pro himself. So the first 30 or so minutes of this interview, we go into his background and his actual two previous attempts to try and get involved with ownership of the Giants back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then 23 years later, in February of 2020, it kind of came to fruition. And obviously in that time, we've seen the club rebrand, which unfortunately we didn't get to go into too much detail in this week's show. But the club has obviously rebranded, has moved into National Basketball Performance Centre, and already this season, as you'll hear him say, has surpassed expectations compared to the last sort of decade or so, where they've been near the bottom of the table pretty much every single season. Being highly competitive and fielding a roster that is significantly better than in previous years. So yeah, we're super interested to kind of hear where he's coming at it from, what his thoughts are, what his hopes and aspirations are, and some of the challenges that have sort of come to fruition since he's been involved with the club. He is a sort of peak performance coach, working with sports people, elite sports people, for the last 10, 15 maybe 20 years, so it comes with a sort of very psychological based approach. So yeah, it was a super interesting conversation. Hopefully, if you've been kind of wondering about what's going on with the Giants, this will provide some insight into that. As always, before we do get into the show, got to give a quick mention for our Patreon account. Please go and check it out. Click the link above, patreon.com/hoopsfix. There you can start to give a monthly or annual contribution of as much or as little as you would like to help us do the work that we're doing, try and help grow the British basketball media landscape. For the price of a cup of coffee, you can support us, help fund this truly important work, what I consider to be my life's mission. So please go and check it out, patreon.com/hoopsfix. As always, you can reach out to me on every single social media platform at Hoopsfix. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Obviously, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. And if you prefer some one-on-one interaction, drop me an email, sam@hoopsfix.com. Anyway, that is enough from me. Here is this week's show with Giants owner Jamie Edwards. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. I got to say, very excited to, I know we connected a long time ago, didn't we? 10 months ago, or when, probably, I don't know, 8 months ago.
Yeah.
And, so yeah, very excited to be here, especially at this time of the morning.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, for listeners, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Jamie's an early starter, as am I. But it works in both of our favours. But the voice cords do need some warming up, so I might sound a little bit raspy. It has been a long time coming. Obviously, since the I don't know what you want to call it, the takeover, you sort of becoming the new owner of the Manchester Giants. It was something I immediately wanted to reach out and kind of have a chat and sort of dig deeper into the plans. Obviously, now that we're a little bit further down the line, there's probably a lot more to talk about, because you've kind of been in it and you're kind of seeing how things work and kind of getting to grips with everything. I do always want to sort of talk about the present day, but I think it's important for context of people to kind of know your background. And I think that's the place to start, is to kind of go back in time and sort of talk about your background in basketball, how you first got involved with basketball, and kind of, we'll obviously go over the timeline, but obviously what brought you to this point today where you are now the owner of the Manchester Giants. So let's start there with kind of like your early years, how you first got involved with basketball, where it was, how it came to be.
I guess like a lot of people in the game, you take that back to, your high school days. I'm from Manchester, but my mind takes me back to an area called Oldham, Saddleworth, just north of there. And I started as I was influenced by a PE teacher, a school teacher who, in 1 year, what would be year 8 now, I was in the team, and in year 9, I decided I didn't want to play because I didn't like the year 9 teacher, and and I walked past the board, and my name was on the team sheet, and I was like, oh, I'll give it another go, and if it wasn't for him putting me on the team sheet, I would not have been playing basketball. I wouldn't be sat here today doing what I'm doing. That guy is still a very good friend of mine today. He actually was a referee as well, a guy called Mark McLaughlin. So the referees out there will remember Mark, and so I always go back to that moment that there are certain things that happen and you don't know why, and I ended up being in the team, and I was like, oh yeah, I really like this. Now in Saddleworth, the rain comes in sideways, so I actually gave up playing football because it was too cold. So so it was great to be able to continue that. But Oldham, and I'm sure the basketball historians will know that Oldham has a rich history of basketball as a small town, and there's been some really good players that have been produced there. And at one point, there's about 4 or 5 teachers who would be good National League coaches right now, and that was in one town. So that was my journey, and with it being in the region of Manchester, I ended up going down to Manchester United as it was back in the day.
We hear a lot about that Manchester United program. I guess what are your memories of the program, and can you talk about in the context of that time, like how big of a deal was it? What were people saying about it? What was the sort of the culture around it?
Well, in all sports, you get the small club, big club. And for me, I always say, and I say it now, that cream always rises to the top. So your better players are always going to gravitate to a bigger or a perceived better club. And I was like that. And so Manchester United were there, and I went for a trial. I didn't get in. And, and I was like, okay, I vowed to be the first guy picked the year after. And I was blessed that, I've had 2 playing mentors really in my career. One of them, Cleve Lewis, the other one I'm sure we'll talk about later on. But Cleve Lewis mentored me, worked out with me, and the following year I go down to the trial. Joe Forber's there. And interestingly, my 2 Oldham coaches said to me, you don't want to be a big, you want to be a big fish in a small pond. You don't want to be a small fish in a big pond. That was one of them. The other one said to me, he said, you'll never make it as a basketballer. You're too small. Okay. Now, I refer back to those 2 conversations, and I actually remember that. I remember a teacher saying to me, you won't make much of yourself. And I remember the basketball coach. It's funny how you remember these things. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go down there. I'm going to see what I can do. I was the first person picked. And I remember walking in, and I looked at one of the coaches, and I said to him, I said, what are you doing here? He was actually my Oldham Celtics coach, but had never told me that he was going to Manchester United. I said, what are you doing here? And he said, what are you doing here? You're kind of leaving Oldham Celtics. So I distinctly remember Joe Forber. I remember Chris King and Pluto Viliotis. They were like the juniors, and they were refereeing and organising the trials. And you were going to play for Manchester United. That was a big deal at Stretford Sports Centre. So the program, I was out in the sticks, so I didn't really know about the program until I got there. Anyway, I just remember seeing kids, and I remember seeing black kids everywhere because I was the only black kid at Saddleworth School. So I just remember seeing black kids everywhere, and I was like, wow, this is, and they could run fast and they could jump. And so I have very fond memories of that. And it was like an under 16s program, and it was split. The city was split into east and west. What is really north and south, but they called it east and west. And there was huge rivalry going on in the city basketball wise. But I was out of it, Sam. So it was really good for me to be in the city. And I guess, if I look back, I look back some of the players. I look back, Manchester being the city that it is and the talent that's come out of it. I think it's had that for many, many, many years.
The other thing I noted in the notes that I asked for you to send me kind of through before this recording was, you spoke about that with that program as an under 16. You used to go and watch the seniors and the under 19s play, and it was kind of like you. And I know a few people sort of that played in that era talk about the fact that all of the programs were linked right through, so that the juniors were very closely tied to the seniors because you'd all play on the same day. So there would be a whole sort of game day around where you'd all watch each other. Essentially, it would almost, I guess, something like that would cultivate sort of the club feel. And I think that is something that you kind of are hoping to do with the Giants. Can you kind of talk about that and sort of your memories of that?
Yeah, and this is it's strong. It's strong, Sam. The memory of going to Stretford and, as an under 16, and we wouldn't play. We'd go to watch the juniors play. And so I was watching Andy Lang, Chris King, Paul Parry, all those guys. I remember them today. And they were playing before the seniors. So you'd have Birmingham Bullets coming to Stretford, the juniors, and you'd be like, I was like, wow, look at that long guy, Spencer Dunkley, look at him. And then they had this guard, I forget his name, but he was smooth. It wasn't Hansel, it was before Steve will be, and I was like, yeah, that's where I want to be. And so, and then you'd stay for the seniors. But the seniors, what would happen is they'd walk into the gym and they'd be watching the juniors. And I was like, so we had one game and it was, we got to play there once in the season. It was East versus West. It was like the derby. It was like the internal club derby. East versus West, and there was a point guard in the West called Sean Foote, and there's a lot of guys who have been listening to this who'll remember Sean. Sean now lives in Canada, and I actually bumped into him last Christmas. He comes home every Christmas. The first thing he said to me, Sam, was he said, "Do you remember that game?" And he said, "You busted us," and I remember, like, I think it was Tony Balogan and Michael Blunt and Alton Byrd and all those guys were watching on the side, and we beat them by 8. That was before a senior game, and it is something that we will replicate now because it was that aspiration of, you play there and then watch the seniors. So I know that we've not done that here. I don't know whether other clubs do that now, but I think it had a very, very powerful impact on that generation back then.
The other thing that I noted was that playing with the under-19s, you played at Royal Albert Hall, which is a sort of legendary venue that I've seen photos of. There are some photos if you Google it, I think on the Royal Albert Hall website, of basketball games that were played there, and it looks incredible. So I'd love to hear you about that.
Let me tell you, when I say I've performed at the Royal Albert Hall, and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, of course. Michael Bublé's been there, and Jamie Edwards played there as well. And I mean, that was, just I think about it now, and I've told my kids, it's crazy, and it was just, again, this was the under 19s. You were going to play a final at the Royal Albert Hall. That was a big thing. And so, the rivalry between Manchester and Birmingham and East London Royals and Brixton, like those were, those are like folklore stories. What I would love to do is to get all of those guys in a room one day, because if you ask any of them, they were instrumental times in, in their sporting development and their lives. So I go back to that final, and there was David Lavinia. Yeah. So again, I'm 16 at this time, and I'm playing 2 age groups up, and the starting point guard for what was the best junior team in the country. And I'd never met all these guys, Lavinia, the Brixton Top Cats. I'm just a kid from Saddleworth, so all these guys, I just remember like Mike Burton and Joe, the preparation for the week. Pluto and Chris took me under their wing, and I was just like, how can you not be good playing with these guys? Yeah, and I mean, Sam, I don't know if I told you, I can talk for 5 days without coming up for air. So
no, it's good. I'll cut when I need to. Yeah, go on.
I think from a if we talk about from a playing point of view, because listen, I'm very passionate about young people and their development, regardless whether it's basketball or not. But in terms of basketball, I got the opportunity to run a team, but it wasn't just handed to me. And I watched. I remember Joe Forber shouting, and Mike, they scream a lot, and I remember him screaming, "We don't have one guard who can defend a ball handler full court. We don't have one." And so I was just at practice. I was just invited to practice with the juniors, and I'm like, they don't have one guard who can defend a point guard full court or bring the ball up and start an offense. That's all I did. I used to go on the lane in Saddleworth, little roads up there, and I used to do defensive slides on the lanes. And then get to the other end, pick the ball up and do zigzags. And that's all I did to get that starting spot. So yeah, but I was blessed to be playing with that group. And, we went on to win a couple of trophies that year. And so yeah, great memories. Thank you for polishing it.
And then, at some point in all of this, the legendary Alton Byrd, who, of course, many consider to be the greatest player to ever play in the UK, sort of became your mentor. Like, how did that come about, that connection, and obviously him sort of taking you under his wing?
Well, Sam, I lived 3 buses away from Stretford Sports Centre, and every day the first team had training at Stretford, I would catch a bus to go and watch them train. And I used to sit on the side of the court, and because I used to have a poster of Alton on my bedroom wall. And when he was up at Murray in Edinburgh. And so when United signed him, I was like, oh my God, this is great. So Mike Burton was the assistant coach to Joe Welton, and I was, and Mike was the coach for the junior team with Joe Forber. So I said, can I come and watch practice? And he said, yeah, of course. So I used to sit on the side of the court, and I was probably about maybe a week and a half into just sitting watching. And Mike said, come over here. I'm going to introduce you to Alton. And that was it. I talk about it today in terms of, access. You got to show up. When you show up, good things happen. If you don't show up, good things can't happen. So I showed up. All the other kids in Manchester had the opportunity to show up. And he took me under his wing. And, for me, the rest is history, because, I couldn't have been blessed with, having access to, I say arguably the best American, certainly best American point guard to come to this country.
Do you think the fact that you're a point guard, obviously he's a point guard, he's kind of small as well. Obviously you're undersized at 5'6". Like, do you think that sort of synergy is what sort of allowed him or made him interested in you, because he felt like there were a lot of similarities where he could teach you a thing or two?
Oh, I mean, when people often talk about, how did I get into doing, like training brains and things like that, a lot of it was because of the conversations. Cleve Lewis, big influence, fundamentals, basics. Cleve was very understated, 6'6", point guard. Wouldn't say boo to a goose, but, mentally tough. Just, you hardly noticed him. Alton was the other way, charismatic. And, I remember him picking me up, and he just got, because he was a stockbroker as well. What a lot of people don't know is that Alton also had a full-time career whilst he was here for basketball. He actually didn't come to England to play basketball. So smart cookie, Columbia University, and he always worked full-time when he was a player. A lot of people don't know that. He never played full-time. And he'd say to me, he'd say, Jamie, do not just be a basketball player. So I remember him picking me up. My influence with jazz music was because that was on in his car. His black BMW he'd just picked up, and then we turn up at his house, and he pulls into the garage, and he's got a pair of Adidas shoes, like on all three walls of his garage, in boxes. Yeah. I mean, what does a 15, 16-year-old kid, you're looking at that, and I remember saying to myself, one day I'm gonna have a shoe deal. Yeah. And and I did. I ended up having a shoe deal, but it was because of that influence. And again, I think the interesting thing, it wasn't that, it was just the access. It was just the being around. It was just listening to how he talked, listening to how he talked to teammates, the things that, as I was a bit older, I remember him saying to me, he said, Jamie, the first thing you do, you come out of the locker room, you go kiss your mum, kiss your girlfriend, and then you go speak to people. And so it's those kinds of lessons that, he had a huge influence on me, and I'm sure he influenced others. I was just very close. So yeah, great. I could talk all day about him. And he's still a mentor today, in what he does. He's, VP of the Brooklyn Nets.
So you ended up going to high school, and it was actually his former high school that you went to. Is that correct?
That's correct. So as a lot of youngsters say, I want to go to America. And he used to ignore me at first, and then I'd say, I want to go to America, or I want to go to high school. He said, if you want to go to high school, it's school first and basketball second. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's what you think. I'm going to play ball. And he said, if you want to go and play basketball, then you just go for the summer, and you can go to camp and you can play as much basketball as you want. The school he went to is a school called Archbishop Riordan in San Francisco. And then you can imagine legendary status in San Francisco he's got, and at the school. And he said, and he spoke to my mum and my dad about it. And he said, look, if he wants to go, let's find a way to get him there. And by the way, it's private Catholic school, all boys, fee paying, no scholarship. Back in 1988. Yeah. Wow. So, I went to stay with a friend of his family's who lived about, a mile away from the school. And, great time. I mean, it taught me a lot more outside of the game. It did wonders for my basketball, but it did more, go into, there was 22 nationalities in the school. So, again, going from Saddleworth, only black kid in the school, to now I'm into this melting pot of nationalities. So was really, really interesting. And they had a rich tradition of basketball. They were a D1 school. So they played Division 1 basketball, but was a Division 3 school, which is based on the size of the school. And so big school, in terms of reputation. So I didn't walk in there with, Alton Byrd has hooked this up for me. I had to earn my spot. So I know a lot of kids today, that's their route. They want to go to college and they want to go to high school, and and it's interesting with what some of the plans are here. I think that's not the best route for everybody. I think there has to be a plan for when you go in, and there was a plan for me, and there were certain things I had to do with my game, Sam, before I actually got there. It wasn't America was going to turn me into the player. I had to do things to actually know I could compete before I went.
And then you didn't go to college and didn't play university ball?
No, I didn't. So I got offered a scholarship but turned it down. And so I ended up coming back.
Well, why did you turn it down?
It's interesting. I think even back then I had aspirations of playing professionally. If we're talking about mentors and people who you come across, Kurt Xavier was, around that time, I bumped into an ex in different ways, had influence on me, and it was interesting that I came back. I remember him saying, Jamie, go college, that's not for you. It's like, so. Do I think what would life have been like if I'd have gone to college? I think you where you are and you make the decisions at that time, and so it wasn't I wasn't. I came back because I really felt that for me I wanted to do things in Europe. That was my plan.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you ended up coming back, and obviously at this time, so we're talking early.
My tea now, by the way. So
trick away. So this was early 90s, right? 1990.
Wow.
So you ended up playing for.
Now look, I think. Yeah.
and you ended up playing with Cheshire, and so you were reunited with the likes of Mike Burton and Joe Forber.
Yeah. So I came back, and I loved them. So, I'd been away for a couple of years. So I was 2 years in high school, came back, and it was just, I felt like I was mature, and going back to play for those two, it was an obvious one for me, I think. And Mike and Joe just, they squeezed the most out of everybody. So great time. I really started to learn how to run a team, and I was 19, and again, and it's something that I think the game has to do, and we've got a couple of young guys in our squad right now, and I've said to them, you're not just here making up numbers. Joe Welton said to me once, he said, are you starting for the under-19s, the juniors? And I said, no, I'm just training with them. And he went, so why are you not starting? And literally, I've got the head coach of Manchester United saying to me, why are you not starting? And I was like, well, yeah, why am I not starting? And he said, if you're good enough, Jamie, the coach will play you. And that's all I needed, Sam. That's all I needed. I was gone. I was like, yeah. And by the end of the 6 weeks holidays, I was starting for that junior team. But I think a lot of young players, young people, and again, this is what I do for, I train brains. A lot of young people do not listen to what I call them, the librarians, the people that went before you. And it's really about studying. And if somebody like that says, why are you not starting? then I think that's just a lesson to say, well, yeah, why can't you do that?
Yeah.
So I was blessed. I keep saying I was blessed. I'm fortunate. And you can tell I'm just I'm smiling at, those times. And when, I came back to play for Cheshire and I'm running a D1 team. That's balling. Dave Gardner, England international. He was my first look down the floor. It's like, where's Yogi? Yeah. So
how many years did you end up doing in the pros as a professional player?
Good question. See, you asked me for my basketball CV, and I'm like CV.
But it was roughly what, like 4 or 5 years, something like that.
Yeah, it was. I had what was because it seemed like I'd been around for a while because I was young. I was saying to Dougie the other day, I said it was like I was the Michael Owen of basketball. I'd come onto the scene and it seemed like I'd been around for a while, but I was like I said, I was only 19. Dougie said to me, he said, I remember when you got your first England cap. He's like, who's this Jamie Edwards guy? Because I wasn't playing BBL when I got my cap.
Wow. Yeah, so that's the other thing that's just worth mentioning. So yeah, you obviously went to the Commonwealth Games event in Edinburgh in '91. Played with an England squad with the likes of Ronnie Baker, Joel Moore, Martin Henlon, and all that crew. And so, like I'm aware of time, and I think this is starting to give people a sort of bit of context in terms of your background, and I guess being ingrained in the basketball scene. At what point did you step away from playing? Why did you choose to step away? How did that decision come about?
It came about because of a couple of things: injury and circumstances. My plan, excuse me, Sam. My plan was always, it was to play in Italy. So I wasn't. The aspirations weren't high school, college, can I make the NBA? My aspirations were go and play in Italy.
Why Italy?
I love Italy. It was the Italian basketball was big at the time. This European lifestyle. The leagues around. I remember the Greek guys, the Nick Gallis. That was kind of my era. So I was thinking, retire in Italy, marry a gorgeous Italian, have gorgeous Italian kids. I ended up marrying a Yorkshire lass, got gorgeous Yorkshire children. I wanted to live in a big villa. I ended up in a big Yorkshire house. My plan went down the toilet because I got injured. I had a hernia, which wouldn't really keep you out today, but back then, and also I was in Doncaster playing at Doncaster Panthers for Curtis Xavier, which was a great time. Played with Jason Swain, Kevin Penny, Tony Holly, and again, running that team, Stuart Solomon, God rest his soul, and I was running that team, and we were thinking about going to the BBL, but I was preparing. I mean, we're in like the middle of the season. It's like now November, and I'm preparing my body for a year later. And I was just overtraining, didn't know about what I should be doing. And I was overtraining because I was thinking I'm going up against Ronnie Baker next year, and I used to love watching Ronnie and those guys. And I was like, I need to be ready. And I just, I was just doing too much. So broke down and I ended up going back to Doncaster, but made a decision because I was always coaching. I was always coaching clinics and camps and doing, and that was the influence of Alton because he had camps, and I was like, okay, no, the club the club didn't have, wouldn't pay for my operation, and I vowed never to have somebody control my destiny like that again. And so said I'm gonna go coach.
Wow. So okay. So you left. You ended up doing a bunch of sort of basketball clinics, being involved with NBA Mad Skills, which was a nationwide tour of 16 cities and towns. At what point?
Created NBA Mad Skills.
You created NBA Mad Skills. Okay.
I created that concept.
Okay, and that ended up being was it that was on Channel 4?
Yes. Yeah. So I
go on.
I had so again I was like, okay, I'm going to run some big camps, and that was my plan, my goal. And long story sideways, Trevor Gordon was playing at Manchester Giants at the time, and I was running some camps and clinics. And Trevor said to me, hey, I've got this, the newspaper wants to sponsor a clinic, would you come and coach? And I said, yeah, of course I will. And there was like 80 kids in front of him, and he was looking at me like, Jamie, come and give me a hand. And I kind of stepped in and just, organized the kids, and on the sideline was somebody from the paper, and he was watching, and he said, wow, he said, I've just seen you organize that. And so that led to me being invited eventually for a job interview with the NBA. They just opened their office in London, Mark Cohen and Kimber Hooney. And it was interesting that, he said to me, he said, Jamie, he said, you do not want to be working for us. He said, this is not a job for you. He said, you need to be doing your own thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was very passionate about I guess I was doing skills coaching before there was a skills coach, because I wasn't coaching at a club. I never coached at a club. I wasn't coaching the teams. I was just interested in developing groups and players, and I would go from one place to another, to another, to another. That's what I was doing. I wasn't like in Manchester or in Oldham.
So this was the mid to late 90s, and I think it was around this time that I guess the idea of owning the Manchester Giants sort of first started percolating in your mind. Is that correct? Like, because I'm aware that there were two attempts to actually buy the franchise before this time around 20 odd years later, right?
Yeah, I think it's if you think about the labels of ownership, acquiring, takeover, whatever you want to call it. I put together a group that had done the Manchester United flotation and the Leicester City flotation, and the VCs, and I'd walked into corporate Manchester and said, this is what I want to do. And they were, and it's interesting, today one of those guys is still around, and he said to me, what have you been doing for 20 years? Because I hadn't been in touch with him, and he said, what have you been doing for 20 years? And he's actually one of the reasons. Again, people, if you want to, my own journey and story, and outside of basketball, because I ended up working with a lot of elite golfers and tennis players at Wimbledon and all sorts of things. And if there's a young person listening to this, or anybody, what I want you to take away from, it's not that, I always say this, don't think, oh, he's telling me this because he wants to say how. It's like, what's the one thing you can take away from it? And for me, the takeaway is there's been people. I always say it's people and relationships. Alton Byrd, Mark Halliwell, who was the lawyer. Mark said to me, he said, I'm gonna introduce you to somebody. We're going to play golf. He said, you do play golf, don't you? And I went, no. And he said, and I couldn't take up the invitation. And so I went away, and I was like, I'm gonna go and learn how to play golf, because he was trying to help me. And I got very good in a year. Got down to 9 handicap within which, for a golfer, that's pretty good, especially in a year. And then the golf kind of led to different things. But I said to Mark a year ago, I said, Mark, if it wasn't for you, you've helped thousands of people, because if I hadn't have got into golf, I wouldn't have gone down that route. And so, I can't say it enough to, especially the young basketball players, there's people who are trying to help you, but, I always say peer-to-peer, people at your level, the kids, etc. Listen to them, yes, but it's always going to be somebody older than you that's going to open a door. They're going to share something. That's not the generation today. You get your information from Google or from somebody your own age. But I'm going to say it's usually, the doors open by like building relationships that way. So yeah, that was a stellar team we put together. We tried twice, didn't happen, and kind of closed the door on it. Sam,
what was the interest like? What was it that made you think, I want to own a BBL franchise? I
didn't think of it like I want to own. That's like egotistical. Like I want to own. I'm not. I wanted to transform something. I wanted to add value to something. I wanted to. So, at the time, it was the team was fun. Again, you had Holly, you had Baker, you had Gordon, you had all those guys. Perry, Robinson, all those guys. They're in an arena. Even when they were in the velodrome, the foundation, it was like there was no legs under the table. And what I saw and what I was doing, and they said, why don't you just go and work for them? I said, do you really think that I could do this by just working for them? I said, it's not possible. And so, I saw that, if you're going to build, you got to build from the ground up. You don't get a good club from just having a good team. It's not the team that makes the club good. And actually, there's a different level to that. And so, it's going from club to an organization. And that's what I saw back then. And I also saw what I call my 10 by 10 plan, that I've spoke, to people around at the minute, which is, it's what the branding's about. There's the Roman numeral X, which is symbolic for the 10 boroughs. 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester. And this was even 23 years ago. I was looking at that team and thinking, oh my God, each player an ambassador for each borough of Manchester. Ronnie Baker, the Earl of Stockport, Tony Holly, the Mayor of Rochdale, and that becomes their responsibility, that borough. And so it's like scaling it. So normally what you have is in any club and in any sport, in any sport, you have a player who's great in the community, or you have, even the footballers, you have certain footballers who are like, oh, I've got to do this or I've got to do that. And then you have some who are just great at that. And so the 10 by 10 plan was more about all 10 players being deployed at the same time.
So those two attempts, what years was that you were trying to originally get involved? It was between 96, 97, 98. And what was it that ultimately stopped it from happening?
They didn't want to engage.
Right, they just didn't want to sell.
That's it. Yeah, didn't want to engage.
And the other thing, I would guess, maybe I'm wrong, but in that time, I would have guessed that the franchise was probably actually worth a lot more than it would have been this time around.
Well, they were winning at the time, and they were winning, and they were in the arena. And when you're winning and you're in an arena, but we never got to the table. So.
Wow. So then let's fast forward to the present day. Fast forward 23 years. Of course, you in that time of obviously, you got your training brains, which is essentially you're a peak performance coach working with elite athletes, whether that's be golfers, footballers, tennis players, whatever it may be.
People.
Yeah. That entire time, have you been thinking, I'm just biding my time, waiting for an opportunity that the situation is right, or did you just kind of put it to the back of your mind, and then the opportunity arose because obviously the Giants were in the situation they were in, and you were like, oh, well, actually, maybe we can make this happen again. Like, how did that this time? Obviously, I think did it end up happening in February of 2020 of this year? That was the actual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't biding my time. I stayed close to. The club came back, as you know. I didn't even know the club came back in 2012, because in that period of time I was running around Europe, doing what I do. So I actually wasn't even thinking basketball. And then, the club came back with, a group of guys, and passionate guys. One of them I played with as a 16-year-old in that East Manchester, the Manchester United East team. Graham, great guy, great friend still, and I didn't even know that the club had come back. So, we'd had a conversation 5 years ago. There wasn't the right time for me at that time, and fortunately, as they say, the stars aligned and things happen for reasons, and reasons that sometimes I had no idea why it happened. So why did it happen as it did now? Who knows?
So let's get into the nitty gritty of essentially, transferring ownership of a BBL franchise. Like, how does it work when a franchise becomes available potentially? Like, what's the process? How did it go down?
That's not, that kind of detail is. I know you've told me that's something that you want to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will gladly. Down the road when, I'm coming to London this Friday, I will gladly sit down with you and we can have a conversation about that. But I think the question that you're really asking, and what I'll say is, and interestingly, a player that, we were recruiting this summer said, I want to own a club one day. And I said to him, well, are you preparing for that now? And he said, what do you mean? I said, I was preparing for it, years and years and years and years ago, in terms of, not the conversations with Alton, when Alton says, go into the bar, kiss your mum, kiss your girlfriend, and then go and talk to people. That's what was the key things. And I think for, I'm not saying this for basketballers, I'm saying this in general. What makes things happen are people and relationships.
So I feel like you might answer this now, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In terms of the ownership, are you the majority sole owner? Like, how many other people are involved? How many people did you bring to the table to kind of to be involved with the club?
How many other people?
Yeah, like who like, because you're the only name that essentially is really publicly associated with it, right?
It's you would say I'm the lead guy. I'm the influencer at the minute. I'm the chief excitement officer. Yeah, that's so that's what I am. The club is actually owned by an entity, so it's so I don't need to have across the door. So I'm the influencer right now, leading change.
And so when you talk, like, because again, we look at the Manchester roster this season. Clearly, there is a bigger playing budget than there has been in previous years. When we talk about where the money's coming from, like with the sources of that money, like, can we discuss that?
No.
Why the secrecy around it?
It's not secret. It's just not a conversation for. It's just not a conversation for this forum.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so you're now almost a year. So it would be a year in February that you've kind of taken over the club. When you talk about, I guess, your expectations coming in, what you expected running a BBL franchise to be like, being a part of the BBL to be like, and then the reality is kind of, how would you assess the first? Of course, you've had to deal with coronavirus, which I would assume makes things very different compared to how it might have otherwise been. But how would you assess that first 10 months of progress? What are the sort of, I guess, the biggest learnings, the biggest things that you've taken from sort of being in the position you're in now?
Don't be surprised at anything. Don't be surprised at anything. So I'm not surprised at anything. Challenges. I expect challenges, whether it's from a player, whether it's from just challenges. So that's part of it. People ask me all the time, am I enjoying it? Of course. But nobody planned for coronavirus. But even in a non-pandemic, there would have been challenges anyway. So the biggest learnings are, there's an appetite for this club, not just internally but externally and even further apart. There's an appetite for it to do well.
So, how would you assess the state of Manchester basketball? One of the things that we hear across British basketball consistently is the need for everyone to come together. It's like people need to stop working by themselves. There needs to be a joining of forces, etc., etc., etc. Obviously,
Is this in the basketball 101 manual?
In terms of what? What do you mean?
I don't know. Is that you just said there's a?
I would say that when we talk about British basketball, one of the things that consistently comes up is essentially different factions working against each other as opposed to together, and people working in isolation rather than together. Whether that is the home nations and the British Basketball Federation, whether that is different clubs, whether that is different organisations, there is.
Why is that? Let me throw that back to you and ask. You why that is.
Well, I would, if I was to say my best guess is because obviously self-interest prevails, right? And everyone's got their own different agendas that they are trying to prioritise, and I guess there's maybe a sense of, well, I can understand. Like if I was in a situation, like I would only want to work with certain people. I'd want to work with my people. There are certain organisations and whatever else that even in my situation, the stuff that I do now, like there's certain people that I'd rather not work with. Like, so yeah, like if I was to answer the question, that would be it.
Okay, so throw it back to me then.
So my question to you is, like essentially your assessment of Manchester basketball, why there hasn't been able to be a sort of bringing together previously, and I guess how you're personally, approaching it in terms of what you want to do with the Giants, whether it is a case of working in isolation, or do you feel there are potential partnerships, working with other clubs, just kind of, I guess, your assessment on it all.
I love that question. Sam, the first thing was, or not was, but is, because we're right at the beginning of this journey. So I have to say that, first of all, in recognition to the previously getting the club to this point was the club had it had been stewarded by a couple of groups that have done, if it wasn't for them, the club wouldn't be here. So I have to acknowledge that. So does the city, so does the game. So there is an acknowledgement of that. But even before I come here in Manchester, and I know I've heard similar things in other places, that there's been dysfunction, just like you said. So it's not anything that I describe. It's like a family. People talk about basketball, don't they, in sports? It's like a family. It's like a family. And so you've just said the words self-interest. I don't know. I know of the people in Manchester, and there's some great stuff that's happened in Manchester, because if you think about it, look at some of the players that have been produced in Manchester. Look at the programs in Manchester. So I really think, for me, my focus is the Manchester Giants right now, and the Manchester Giants being pulled up to where lots of people talk about, and I say, it's got so much potential. It should be this, it should be that. And it should be. But I wasn't part of the people not being around that table. I wasn't a part of it. So I can't comment on why. But if I start commenting on why, then I become part of what didn't help the game go to, or whether it's this club or the game, go to the levels that everybody believes it should be able to go to. So I don't get, well, first of all, I'm the new guy at the table, but I'm not going to get into that conversation, because if I get into that conversation, then that's the definition of insanity. I'm doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting something to change. So Sam, I don't know whether it answers the question, but yes, it's the old adage. Before you can help, on the plane, and they say, put your own mask on, put your own life jacket on first before you can help. I think the Manchester Giants, a club like this, has to do that first internally before it can start talking about the wider context.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the
you think I'm it's a topic that I'm very passionate about, but I'm not going to get into the what's around the table.
Yeah. Of course, I understand. Yeah, it's a case of focusing on what you need to do, what you think the club needs to do to ensure that you're good first. And I totally understand that. One of the biggest things, the more tangible things that's happened since you become involved with the club is, of course, you're now playing out of the National Basketball Performance Centre, which has been something that has been spoken about for years. It's like, how have we got facilities in Manchester and yet the only professional franchise is not playing in one of them? How did that end up coming to be? And what was your understanding of why it hadn't happened prior? Because it seems like a pretty obvious move, right?
Oh, why did it not happen? I don't know why it didn't happen. Lots of people said it's got to happen, it should happen. It's the obvious. Well, sometimes the obvious is, I'm not looking for the obvious. I'm looking for what's not obvious. So I'm looking for, Sam, I don't know why it didn't happen.
Was it easy to make happen?
No.
Why not?
Why not?
What are the barriers that you've got a national performance centre and the only BBL franchise in the city isn't playing it? Like, what are the barriers that stop something like that from happening?
What are the barriers?
Yeah, like you just said it wasn't easy. So it's like, well, why not?
No, if it was easy, then you just walk in and you just go, okay, that's where we want to play, and that's where. But what I'm doing here is the first thing is the energy has to change around, the energy. It's energy between people, isn't it? It's energy between organizations. It's energy between players and teams. So energy, and you could call that it's just a label for culture. It's a label for relationships. So energy has to change, and if energy is the same, you get the same thing. If you don't change the pace of the game, you get stuck. You just keep walking it up the floor, you get stuck. You keep running, you get stuck. You've got to change the energy, and that's what had to happen. We had to change the energy. We have to change the culture. We have to change the relationships, and so that was the obvious. Go to the national basketball. If I had a pound for every time, I was told that, the corona wouldn't be a problem. Yeah, but listen, that that was it's all historic stuff. Then it's all historic stuff. I'm interested in today, Sam.
Yeah.
I'm interested in today.
Yeah, of course, but you can't. It's like, without having that historical context, it's very hard to know. Like, I'm always said I think the history of the game is so important, because it's like, if we don't know what's come before, we're bound to repeat the same mistakes and everything else, right? So it's like you have to kind of know what the issues were, or have an awareness of what people say, certain whatever it might be, so that then you can come into the situation and be in a better position to change it, right, and be better.
Well, do you know what's interesting there? I love history. You've been watching The Crown, yeah?
No.
You've been watching The Crown
No.
on Netflix. I love history, yeah. I always, that's why I say there are librarians of the game. There are certain people who are librarians of the game. It's why I brought Jason Swain back as the commentator. And I played with Jason. He's a librarian of the game. There are certain coaches who, certain coaches and players who librarians of the game who I want to have involved. But I say, look back if it makes you smile. Look back if it makes you smile. If it doesn't make you smile, don't go back to it. And, nothing to do with me, purely fact, the club, and I saw this on somebody, it might have been you, it might have been another of the journalists, basketball journalists, but I saw this, it was presented to me. The club had been bottom of the BBL table for 8 years. It was a decade table of the BBL.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah, it was there or thereabouts, for sure.
Yeah. So.
Oh, you mean I know which one. I know which one you mean. Yeah, yeah. When it had the overall win-loss record rather than the individual season records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, what can we say? You know that.
Yeah.
I can't. There's enough. I actually can't say anything to that right now. Is that whether it's me or somebody else, something has to change. Energy, and it's back to this is Manchester, and I know that there are people who are very passionate about the basketball in Manchester, very passionate, which is great because that's what it needs. But it's how do you move that? The history of how do you move it forward? How do you move it forward?
When we talk about the history, and I guess that the culture of the club, one of the big surprises for a lot of people this off-season was the release of the Jones brothers. Obviously, notably Callum Jones, who penned the open letter, basically saying that he was willing to play even essentially for no pay, just to be involved, and he saw himself retiring there, and obviously ended up leaving. And I think the only sort of Coach Byrd essentially said that we want to focus on the future, and it was a difficult decision, and and focus on a sort of young British core, and he's essentially not part of that. Like, how difficult of a decision was that? And when you look at a player of his experience and someone who clearly can still contribute on the court as well, like what was that decision? How did that come about and come to be, and why was that decision made?
Well, it wasn't based on a young British core. It was the average age was over 30 years old. Coach, it was, and by the way, I've known Callum. I've known Callum for a long time. Great guy. Has done a lot for the game, and has been around Manchester for all his life. Wasn't an easy decision for the coach, for myself. But here's the thing. Coach wanted a certain style. He wanted a team, a younger team, and it needed some change, and that was it, and that was it. Difficult decision. Can't say that any other way. Very difficult decision, but Callum, he's gonna have a good season, and with Sheffield, and has got a lot to contribute to the game, and I'm sure he will contribute in different ways going forward. But the coach wanted to. It wasn't about a British core. It was about him, looking at, well, this is where we were age-wise, and he wanted to change.
We have seen a lot of talk about sort of essentially homegrown local talent. Where do you see sort of the junior development aspect fitting in to the sort of the Giants pathway, and how do you see balancing out at the BBL level, having a balance between player development, but also of course winning? Well,
again, if you look at this summer, we signed 3 players from academies, and that was the intent there. 1 from Charnwood, 2 from Myerscough. I had opportunities when I was that age, not just to be at the end of a bench, but there you go. And so that's a big part of it. I want young players to have opportunities. If you're good enough, then you'll play. Zach Powell came back. Zach played more minutes than any 20-year-old in the BBL last year. I think he's got a hell of a future. Not even a hell of a future, just right now he can play. So I think from a development point of view, there needed to be a pathway, right the way from in primary schools right the way through. There was no academy in the club, So we've started a partnership with Xaverian College, and there's another college as well, which is not really about the performance side, but we've got two colleges. So the one of the first things that the junior club, which was kind of over there as well, so it wasn't connected, and I actually, it was literally, I think, in my first week, and I said to Adrian, who was running the junior club, and I said, Manchester City, don't say, there you go, there's our name, develop us some players. It's like in-house, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be part of a pathway. And that's a big job for us, but I'm very, I'm more than interested in the development of the kids. Probably more so outside of basketball than in basketball, because I'm very interested in what the 10 by 10 plan is. 10-year-old kid in 10 years time, where's he going to be?
Yeah, like the when you talk about kind of like actually getting tangible minutes for these young players, is it a case of they need to be good enough first? Like when we're talking about sport specific, do you want to focus on kids specifically from Northwest Manchester area, or is it a case of like any young British guys, ideally if they're good enough, would bring them in? Obviously with an academy, it potentially gives you options to bring in players external to the Northwest, or is it about sort of the local development?
Well, it's an interesting one, because this, you're in a major city, just like Birmingham's a major city, just like, Newcastle and, the major cities around the country. So there's a pool of natural ability just as human beings in these cities. So there's two things I could say. One, I'll say, doesn't matter which city you're from, the ball doesn't know that you live in M12, and the ball doesn't know how old you are. And very often, it's like, oh, I'm only 19. Am I going to get to play? Well, the ball doesn't know you're 19. And you could say Luka Doncic. Was he thinking, oh, I'm only 17? So there's a mentality that a young player has to develop, and to be able to not just, and I see this because of the work that I do in other sports, is that a young player will talk themselves out of that, or they're not ready because they've actually not learned, like their body's ready. This is what I would say. Their bodies are ready, their skills might be ready, but their mentality hasn't caught up with their body or their skills. And so that's where a coach is going to say, why am I going to put you in? Because you're not ready. And again, the only way you learn that and fast track your mentality is having access to that information. And all those, I'm going to say, old pros, Peter Scantlebury, the Trevor Gordons, the Martin Henlons, the Joel Moores, like the Altons. For me personally, I fast tracked my mentality. And that's what I want, having talent. There's a lot of talented kids. I see talented people every day in sports. A lot of talented kids. If we're going to help, whether it's Northwest or the country, develop better players, then we're looking at them saying, wow, they're fast. Wow, they can jump. Fundamentals. How good are their fundamentals? How good are they mentally? Are they, and it's really aligning their thinking with their athletic ability.
Your day-to-day at the moment, what does it look like?
Does that answer that question, Sam?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, obviously there's a lot to do, right? As we've just spoken about for the last hour or so. Like there's when you look at the club and on all the things going on, like on a day-to-day basis, kind of what does your day-to-day look like? I assume that you're still doing your peak performance coaching as well. So there's obviously a lot to balance there.
Well, it's just an extension of, it's just an extension of. Yeah, there is a lot to do. But we're building. It's not a one-man kind of operation that we're looking at. That's it's not going to be centered around Jamie Edwards. I'm a point guard and I was a pass first point guard. Yeah, so that I'm about the marketing guys ringing me now say I'm interested in the development of we've got a trainee physio right now. I'm interested in her development, and so she's doing her placement, but she's also when she contacted me, I said, okay, you're gonna do some work with us, but you're gonna do your placement with a very good friend of mine who's a world-class physio, world-class. I've worked with his athletes, and vice versa. And she's now in his clinic developing pathway relationships, being that close to really how it's working at the elite level. So very important, Sam, that this, you saying what's my day like? It's a lot of moving parts, as it is for every club or any organization. So people keep asking me, am I enjoying it? Of course I'm enjoying it. Depends what hour of the day you ask me now. Yeah, you ask me at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it might be no. If you ask me at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it might be yes. Yeah.
So I'm aware of time. I know you got to shoot, but just a final one to finish on, I guess, is looking to the future. When you look at the aspirations of this club, where it could be, what it could grow to in the next 3 to 5 years. What would you say about kind of the trajectory of the club and where you think it could get to and where you want it to be?
Where do I want the club to be? Well, first of all, we've surpassed expectations for this year already. I want the club.
Surely that's other people's expectations, not your expectations.
Yeah. Well, I would say we've won more games than we did. So I said we can go home now. But you're right. I'm not going to make predictions. People ask me for predictions of scores and all sorts of, are we going to win? Are we going to win? My aspirations for the club, that we impact the game in the community. That's a big aspiration. That we're very, very competitive. I'd like to see the model of Newcastle, Leicester. I talk to those guys all the time. In fact, I'm a big Leicester fan. I'm a big Newcastle fan. And I got to see Newcastle up close the other day, and those guys have been, Paul's created some of those guys have been there 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and you can see that, and that's how you build. That's how you build an organisation. So I'd like to see some titles in Manchester. Yeah, I'd like to see some titles in Manchester. But I'd like to see us, go beyond, what the community. There's a bigger community, not basketball community. There's a bigger community, 3 million Mancunians, and there's plenty of red in the city and plenty of blue in the city. And I believe there's, in the middle, there's plenty of room for green. And I think the game, I think it's overlooked the power of the orange ball, I call it, the influence of the orange ball, and I think it has influence both on the court and off the court. And if we do what we should do, and it's all should, if we do what we should do both on the court, but more so off the court, you could bring the Los Angeles Lakers in here, Sam, right now, right? You bring the Lakers in here, doesn't mean that the club fulfills the potential. Doesn't. And that's if I can contribute to the club fulfilling its potential, that means that there's people have got to fulfill the potential. There's no way a club just springs into what you see in this city and what the league see in this city. It's not going to happen just because there's a team on the floor winning basketball games. It will not happen just because there's a winning team. It has to be about the people going to different levels, and that means the kids, the players, the coaches, the school teachers. There are PE teachers who I've coached basketball to many years ago, who are like, we've had the club in the school in the past. Can we do it properly? And I said, what do you, blank piece of paper, how would you want to do it? And I've recruited these guys along with the coach and the analyst. And we've not recruited them just because of them playing basketball. If they've just come to play basketball, this is the wrong project. It's the wrong project. Because it's just, if you just come in here to play basketball, that's Jack Hudson. We're going to carry on. Jack Hudson. Jack's a lawyer in the day and a point guard by night. For me, that's more powerful than him being a full-time basketball player.
You think? Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because not every young kid in Manchester or in this country is going to make it as a basketball player, Sam.
For sure. But then wouldn't you want kids that are looking up to the professional league to be looking at full-time professional basketball players and saying, I can achieve my dream of being a full-time pro and not have to do another job to be able to make ends meet?
But, Sam, there are certain things, then that means the league has to go to a different level to be able to facilitate that, which is what the league is looking to do now. But the reality is, there is going to be a kid somewhere who's going to go, actually, I can go to university and I can study and I can play and I could actually have a career as well. Might not, Jack, like I said, he's a lawyer. Alton Byrd didn't play full time. Alton was, he did lots of different things outside of playing. So, but yeah, would you want a full-time? We need to create that environment in the game to be able to facilitate that. That requires certain things happening that are nothing to do with the basketball game. They're nothing to do with, shooting jump shots. To be able to facilitate that, to be able to compete with European leagues. That's not a basketball context. And so the point I was making is, yes, what do I see? I see, a Jordan Whelan coming back to Manchester and having influence in the basketball community, not just being on the court, but actually being out in the community. I see, imports coming in and being around. So they become more visual in the city and with the community. And then you've got a 10-year-old kid who probably doesn't play basketball right now, who's going, where will they be in 10 years' time? They'll be 20 years old. Will they be looking at going to college in America? Will they be looking at, what's going to be their plan? Will they be in media like you? We're starting a digital academy. In fact, it's already started informally. We've got a digital academy. Yeah, because there are passionate people who it's giving them access to a professional sports organization. So you might not be good enough to be a top player, but you might see a career in the game. How do we facilitate that for you? And then for us as a club, it's the big European clubs don't send all the kids to university in America. I don't know. Do you know that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the situation. But yeah, there are a lot of top European kids that do go to the States, but there are plenty that also stay here and turn professional.
No, I'm not talking about here. I'm talking about in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, when I say here, I mean Europe.
Okay. Yeah. We're out of Europe now, so yeah. No, but in terms of that's also, Sam, part of that's what I'm looking at right now, is that those clubs do not send their kids to the US. And what's interesting is one of the conversation I have heard is, well, what's that US experience like? Is it beneficial to the development of a player? Does everybody go to university and come back better players, or would their development have been better had they have played Division 1 BBL?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one.
It is. Look, I'm super aware of your time because we've already overran. But yes, that's a perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad we finally got to do this. I think it gives people a good insight into kind of how you're approaching the Giants, and hopefully, we'll see it continue to progress and come to fruition over the coming years. I wish you all the best with it, and I think I'll probably see you this Friday as well.
Look forward to seeing you in London.